Welcome to Managing in the Age of Globalization and Technology. This is an introduction by Dr. Tata. Let's start off with where we are right now. Where we are is a path that has been taken with a lot of hard work and a lot of great thinking. And where we are is known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, the first industrial revolution started with steam engine, with the very famous Stephenson's rocket that zipped past the English cities and towns. And people were amazed that all the manual labour we used to do is going to go by the way of naught. It was the age of machines. The next one, which was the second industrial revolution, started with electricity. And of course, we know of Edison and Tesla and AC and DC and everything about it. But we'll talk more about them as we move forward. Then, of course, came the age of computing, which was the third industrial revolution, the age of computers. Today, the whole idea is, can we connect our daily lives? Can we connect from our cars to our machines, to our door locks, to our light bulbs? Can we connect them all together so that computing becomes a part of our everyday existence? Not only that, the coming of something called AGI, artificial general intelligence, is going to change it all. It will be the time when we simply say, we have somebody, we have the libraries of the world, we have answers to things. The tricky part is making business decisions. So, the part two here, this is the fourth industrial revolution. As we talked about, the first industrial revolution started in around about 1760s, so late 18th century. So in 1760s, James Watt's steam engine started the first industrial revolution. Instead of using horses and humans to pull things, suddenly coal and water could automatically generate power that would run factories and various machines. That's the basis, right? So coal would provide the heat and water would provide you give a chance to boil the water, which would create the steam, and the steam would now make the machines run. That would automatically generate power that would run factories and various machines. Suddenly machines emerged that started to replace horses and manual labour. 1760s is also an interesting time because, of course, America gains its independence in 1775, or begins or declares its independence in 1775. But of course, mind you, right after the American Revolution, and the French, especially Marquis Lafayette, helped the American Revolution, France went into its own doldrums because it lost a lot of its coffers trying to help the Americans get power back from the Brits. And the French Revolution came in 1789. 14 Juillet, the 14th of July, and the fall of Bastille. Right. So that changed the whole idea. That was the time of Voltaire and Rousseau. This is also the time when the Baroque age was waning and the modern age was rising. Kant, the very famous German philosopher, had a saying called sapere aude, which is, you dare to know. Don't just follow. Dare to know. Learn. If you learn, you will challenge. If you challenge, you will innovate. If you innovate, you will make the world better. The French-Indian Wars, Washington, George Washington, the first president of the United States, was a British officer who fought in the French-Indian Wars, and of course, the 7 Years' Wars in Europe was going on at the same time. This led to the Age of Enlightenment, where this asked, why should priests and royals and aristocrats define what we are? The Age of Enlightenment is we have books that tell us what we can do. We don't need to follow tradition, we need innovation more than tradition. based on works by Newton, Descartes. And Descartes, of course, was very famous for saying the very famous phrase, which is cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I exist only because I think by myself. I don't follow. I'm not a parrot. I'm willing to challenge. And of course, Immanuel Kant, which we talked about. Locke, at the same time, was talking about something called social equality, that people need to have the same amount of social rights, dignity, legal rights. Rousseau was talking about a social contract, which is, well, the government is meant to protect us, provide us with public services. That is not something that we need to demand, that is something that should be a given. And Hobbes was talking about the Leviathan, which is, we also need a way for markets to control government so that if the government becomes too powerful, they can become tyrannical. And of course, if you remember, when John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln, his very famous phrase was sic semper tyrannus, which is, thus goes for tyrants. Voltaire in the French Revolution, of course, Voltaire was a very famous French philosopher who was also the father of the Enlightenment movement, whose very famous phrase was, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And that the best is the enemy of the good. You have to begin somewhere. You can't wait for perfection, because if you wait for perfection, you will wait and everybody else will surpass you, but you have to begin. Life is a story of trials and errors. You cannot assume that whatever we do is going to be perfect. It can only be logical, it can only be thoughtful, it can be mindful, but we cannot wait for perfection. So republicanism over monarchism and the quality of life became more important. The role of money also became very important at that point of time, because France was bankrupt from helping America, and that debt led to a social revolution. This is also the time when the very famous Scottish economist Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, Theory of Moral Sentiments, Capitalism and Liberal Economics, where he started talking about the fact that it is capital that defines a country. It is not who the king is or who the queen is. And of course, as people started settling down with machines, life became easier, and there was a population boom where they started realizing that cities are going to be created because sewer systems and machines could work together. Electricity could work, or electricity hadn't arrived then, but the whole idea that some kind of mechanism that would convert the power of machines across an organization, and a city is nothing but an organized set of people, right? An organized community suddenly started a population boom where people stopped being hunter-gatherers or hunters and became more gatherers. Money became the sole way of transactions rather than barters. Then, of course, going forward, the part 2 here came the Second Industrial Revolution. This was 1870s to 1914. Now, mind you, 1870s is an incredibly interesting time, because Europe at that point of time is countries are getting unified. Germany is becoming Germany for the first time. Italy is becoming Italy for the first time. So this all happens in the 1860s to 1870s. The age of mechanization and mass production is what follows. So a century later, the Second Industrial Revolution came. Suddenly machines started getting automated, interchangeable parts reduced costs. Bessemer started the steel production system, brought mass production with rail networks for mass distribution, sewage networks to build communities, electric lines to supply energy, and telegraph networks for mass communication. We started shifting from steam power to petroleum and the coming of the internal combustion engine, where they said, okay, we've found this interesting thing called petroleum, which has a lot of energy and a tiny bit of mass. If we can blow that by introducing oxygen and fire at the same time, it will suddenly blow. But if you blow it within a tiny container, it's going to make something move. That what made move is something called a piston. And that piston became a part of these cylinders. That suddenly became a part of the internal combustion engine. Now, steel could be produced better. Oil could be extracted from the ground in millions of barrels, and electricity could be generated in megawatts to power entire cities. In the US, a period of mass industrialization and growth, Europe went through a belle epoque, a pretty era. From the telegraph to the light bulb, telephone, the Ford Model T, suddenly even the Daimler invented the car. Ford invented the mass production line. So this automated production line, suddenly inventions became much more accessible. People could start buying things, buying automated things, and life was changed for good. In 1870s, however, other things happened too. The very famous Franco-Prussian War humiliated France. That later on led to the First World War. Bismarck and Germany reunification happened in 1871. Germany annexed Alsace and the French industrial heartlands, and Germany became an industrial power. Then, of course, came the Third Industrial Revolution. From 1940s to 2005, this is the age of information, automation, and computing. With production becoming the engine that drove industrial economics, quicker ways to build things were needed. So computers, so the whole idea was, how do you conceive of something where you could feed it some instructions and it would automatically follow that? It was first conceived by Babbage and Ada Lovelace. If you get a chance, she's like one of the coolest women in the world. And she was Byron's daughter, the very famous Lord Byron's daughter, and started the information automation. However, during the Third Industrial Revolution, the Turing machine in the UK deciphered Nazi communications during the Second World War. How could you get vast amounts of information and convert them quickly into solving and figuring out what the Nazis were talking about? Home computers, of course, chips, and the space race created need for remote communications. Of course, the radar came there too. When the British invented the radar, they invented because they wanted to spot the German Luftwaffe attacks on their cities before they happened, so that they could get their Hurricanes and the Spitfires right up in the air. The coming of cell phones and wireless technologies, of course, changed the way everything happened. In the 1970s, the US started networking the computers to decentralize and digitize information across the internet. They called it the internet, or they called it the ARPANET for the first time, because they thought, could we communicate just in case there's a nuclear strike by the Soviets on the US military command? This began the digital revolution, and this became the age of the database and the internet. Then, of course, is where we are, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, 2010 and ongoing. This is the age of smart digital convergence and cognition. With smartphones, Wi-Fi, GPS, and artificial intelligence, we are in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Technology runs everything today. Think of your cars. Most cars have about 20 to 25 different chips at the very least, right? You've got flying drones, you've autonomous driving cars, we're remotely able to close our garage doors, turns on lights, turn on heat, notify, pay Facebook posts, know where we are, know where we parked our car. In the Fourth Industrial Revolution, technology will be used everywhere. Everything will slowly become interconnected. Now, automated machine-to-machine communication is called M2M. This is what happens when, for example, a Tesla talking to another Tesla, right? One machine talking to another machine. One light bulb saying, if I turn off, Could you turn the other light bulb on? Subtly, this machine to machine communication is happening through something called smart devices or Internet of Things. We also call them IoTs. AI, which are cognitive systems, they understand. We now know ChatGPT, we know things like Google Bard, Facebook Llama. These are known as large language models, and you'll get a chance to read one of the cases in your during your coursework. Robotics, smart sensors, wearables. AR is augmented reality and VR is virtual reality. This is the coming of the metaverse. And then, of course, you've got your cyber physical systems and cybersecurity, the threats that underlie that. Autonomous vehicles, alternative energies, space race, cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, sustainability. These are all things that we're talking about. What we are producing is technology driven, not only driven by technology, but also driven by globalization. How we are producing it is also important. So the cost of globalization, there is a cost of globalization. China is emerging as another superpower and it's creating a new Cold War. This China's rise, the leadership, the control of the world stage, the America turning protectionist, is a semblance of the fact that markets, economies change constantly. If you don't understand how the world order works, you also won't understand how innovations work, especially how to manage technology in a world that is intricately linked and globalized. We have global road and satellite networks in the age of colonization. This is the new age of colonization. It's no longer colonization by putting military or people there, but putting companies. It is economic colonization. If you look at China in Africa, China controls most mines in Africa. China loves to build free roads in Africa. It's also called debt diplomacy, giving money away for free. But of course, it is a way of exerting influence by a newfound power. Then, of course, with COVID-19, changed so many things. You see how globalization created and solved a crisis. Something happened in this city called Wuhan in China and spread all around the world, just about closed on the world. But it also solved a crisis. The way the vaccines were invented was incredible. The mind of the scientists who did it and the speed at which we all recovered, it is absolutely massive. And similarly, China started producing more to calm its inflation, right? So it kept producing so that the world could keep consuming, so that the whole idea was that, okay, you can still buy from us. We've got more and more goods. So China was quick to bring back its factories into production because it still serves as the factories for the world. Here are some interesting videos for you to watch. Do watch them. Amazon Kiva are these robots that Amazon typically uses to manage its warehouses. But if you look at these robots, they're absolutely incredible because these robots are tiny Roomba-like machines. I'm trying to do a terrible drawing right now of a Roomba-like machines, but what they do is that they come and they have these wheels and they can simply use that to lift large shelves and bring it every time we place an order. These machines bring the order to the main person who's packaging the order or who's sorting. Typically you have the pickers and the sorters, right? And so forth in an operations setup, and that's what they do. Instead of you using people now to walk between shelves, climb up shelves, you have machines that bring the shelves to you. simplifies life. You can pack much more stuff into a warehouse because you don't need people to move. These Roomba like things called kivas move under the shelves and pull them through. Very interesting, but they also work autonomously. They know when to stop if another Kiva is coming. Same thing with autonomous cars. We see this with companies like Tesla nowadays. Other country companies are also moving towards autonomous vehicles. Understanding the world around you, how to deal with when should you stop, when should when should you brake, when should you accelerate, when should you decelerate, and so forth. So, as you get on to managing for the future, use these different concepts that we've covered in the textbook to discuss how to manage technology and people simultaneously. Ask yourself these questions. How would you motivate people to trust technologies? These are all these interesting technologies everywhere. Do we trust all of them? Would you trust an autonomous vehicle? That would say that it would be way safer than a person with a lot of stress driving you around. Most of the time, we don't know who drives on trains or who pilots our planes because most of them fly on their own. The pilot is only there as an overriding mechanism. How would you manage performance in technology and in people? Is performance different? Who should, if an autonomous car gets into an accident, who's liable? So, using these five concepts, can you think of some recommendations and whether you discuss them, present them to, you don't have to do this, not an exercise, it's more of a mental exercise for you. Thank you very much.